If you are enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. The headlights of Charlie's rig cut through the black night like a blade through velvet. The road stretched out in front of him, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the distance, with only the occasional roadside sign flickering into view, offering nothing but a few words before melting back into the dark. Highway 57, a stretch of road he'd traveled countless times, seemed to stretch on forever tonight, longer than usual. Maybe it was the weight of the hours he'd been on the road, the monotonous hum of the tires, or the endless void of nothingness around him. But something about tonight felt different. Charlie gripped the wheel tighter, trying to shake the creeping unease pooling in the pit of his stomach. He glanced at the clock. 2:42 a.m. He'd been driving for nearly 12 hours now, and the fatigue was starting to hit him hard. The loneliness of the highway wasn't helping. A long-haul trucker, he'd spent more nights than he cared to count on these empty roads. But tonight, he felt a different kind of isolation, one that gnawed at his nerves like something was watching him from just beyond the edge of the headlights. "Damn, I need a break," Charlie muttered to himself, shifting in his seat. The cabin was warm, the radio playing a soft country song that seemed to echo his mood, melancholy, worn out. He yawned deeply, rubbing his eyes. There was a stretch of road ahead that he was familiar with, a few miles that would take him to the next truck stop. He'd planned to refuel and grab a quick bite. But when he finally rolled up to the off-ramp leading to the stop, something felt off. There was no sign of the usual truck stop bustle. No neon lights, no busy trucks, no weary drivers milling around the pumps. Instead, all he saw was an empty, dark parking lot, eerily silent except for the distant sound of wind rustling through the trees. Guess it's a little quieter tonight, he thought, his fatigue making him dismiss the strange absence. Still, something didn't sit right with him. He flicked the turn signal and steered the truck toward the rest stop. The air grew colder as he rolled into the deserted lot. His headlights illuminated the faded sign at the entrance, its once vibrant colors now dulled by years of wear. He parked the truck and killed the engine, but the hum of the cooling engine left an eerie vacuum in the silence that swallowed the night. "What the hell's going on here?" he muttered, eyes scanning the surroundings. This place was supposed to be open 24/7, had been for as long as he could remember. He couldn't see a single light on in the diner, and the row of parked trucks were all empty. It looked like the place had been abandoned for years, but he knew that couldn't be the case. He'd stopped here countless times in the past. With a grunt, Charlie grabbed his jacket and stepped out of the truck. His boots hit the gravel with a soft thud, and the cold air bit at his skin. He turned up the collar of his jacket and started, walking toward the diner, trying to shake the sudden feeling that something was wrong. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he walked, like he was being watched. But he couldn't see anyone. The diner's neon sign flickered weakly in the dark, casting a dim, sickly glow on the cracked pavement. Charlie's boots crunched as he walked toward the door, but when he pulled on the handle, it didn't budge. Odd. He tried again, harder this time, but the door didn't move. The door. He stood there for a moment, perplexed, before a figure appeared in the window, a shape behind the glass. Charlie froze, his heartbeat picking up speed. Was someone in there? He knocked once, twice, but no response. It was like no one was inside. The window's reflection stared back at him. A man, exhausted, standing in front of a diner that was supposed to be open, but felt more like a tomb. He turned and glanced back at his rig, a sense of unease creeping through him again. He thought about getting back in, driving off to the next rest stop, but the road would be another 100 miles or so before he could find another place to pull over, and he didn't have the energy to keep driving, especially with the fatigue starting to cloud his judgment. Maybe I should try the back door, he thought. It was worth a shot. He made his way around the diner, glancing at the long line of empty trucks parked along the side, their cabs empty, windows dark. He couldn't even tell when the last driver had left. At least back at the front, he had a flicker of light from the sign, but around the back it was pitch black. The shadow of the building loomed tall and menacing as he walked cautiously around to the back door. It opened with a creak, and Charlie stepped inside. The air was thick, heavy, as though no one had disturbed it in years. The low hum of a fridge kicking on was the only sound, filling the stillness. But even that was drowned out by an overwhelming sense of silence that pressed in on him from all sides. He stepped further into the diner, squinting in the dim light, his boots scuffing against the cracked linoleum floor. A row of empty tables, stretched in front of him. Dust gathered on every surface, and the chairs were all neatly pushed in as if waiting for a crowd that never came. The counter was empty too. No waitresses, no cashiers, no cooks. Just silence. Charlie's footsteps echoed eerily in the void. He glanced behind him. The door had already closed on its own. He hadn't heard it, but it had clicked shut. This was the last place anyone would want to be alone in the dead of night. He hesitated. Something felt off, like the air around him was holding its breath. He walked to the counter, wiping his hands on his pants. Maybe there was something in the back he could find. Some coffee, a snack. It wasn't unusual for places like this to be left unmanned in the middle of the night, but that didn't explain the unsettling feeling that gnawed at his gut. It felt like this diner was somehow abandoned before its time. As he peered into the kitchen area, he noticed a low light coming from the freezer door. For a split second, the glow made everything look more alive, more real. Maybe the owner had just stepped out for a moment. Charlie approached, his boots clacking louder in the silence. But when he reached the kitchen, he found it empty, just like the rest of the place. No one was here. But why was the light on? He stood in the doorway, his breath coming in sharp gasps now. As he turned back to look at the dining area, a flicker of movement caught his eye from the corner of the room. A shadow. Not just any shadow, but a figure standing near the window, watching him. Charlie's heart skipped a beat. He whipped around, to face the shadow, but by the time he looked, it was gone. The air around him seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. His hand reached out instinctively to grab the door handle, but his mind was racing too fast. Was he being paranoid, or was something really watching him? The silence in the diner had settled over Charlie like a thick, suffocating blanket. He stood motionless by the kitchen door, his breath coming in shallow bursts, as if his body was starting to understand what his mind couldn't yet grasp. Something was terribly wrong. The cold light from the freezer cast long shadows across the room, stretching like dark fingers across the counter. The old radio on the counter crackled softly, playing static, the sound almost comforting in the silence. Almost. Charlie stepped, back from the door, his boots squeaking softly against the tile floor. He turned, eyes scanning the diner, but there was no sign of the figure he'd seen in the corner. Had he imagined it? His exhaustion had been building up over the last few days, and now, in the quiet of this empty diner, his mind was playing tricks on him, or so he tried to convince himself. He walked slowly toward the counter, his hand brushing the edge of the worn, smooth surface. The chairs were all pushed in neatly, perfectly aligned, but there was something unsettling about the stillness of the room. It felt too empty, too quiet. He could hear the distant hum of the neon lights flickering outside, but nothing else. Not even the low murmur of a refrigerator working in the back. Just silence. But then, as Charlie reached the counter, something caught his eye. A pair of eyes, barely visible, staring from the booth closest to the window. The eyes weren't moving. They weren't blinking. It was like they were frozen in time, just staring. But they weren't part of the shadow he had seen before. They were clear, unblinking, and unmistakably human. Charlie's heart thudded in his chest, the adrenaline kicking in, his muscles tensing as if preparing to flee. But his feet felt rooted to the floor. He tried to look away, but something about the eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, kept him locked in place. They were wide, as though the person who owned them had been caught in a moment of fear. Their expression was almost pleading, but it was also empty, like the life had been drained from them long ago. "Hello?" Charlie called out, his voice strained, as though breaking through a heavy fog. His fingers trembled as he wiped his palms on his jeans, his body screaming at him to run, to leave. But his curiosity kept him tethered to the spot. No response. He slowly took a step toward the booth, the floor beneath him groaning as he moved. His hand reached out, but just as his fingers brushed the edge of the booth's table, the eyes blinked. For a moment, everything felt frozen again, like time itself had stilled in place. Then the figure slumped slightly, and the room seemed to sigh. Charlie's breath hitched. The figure wasn't a person at all. It was a mannequin. His pulse raced as he took a step back, his brain processing what he had seen. How could he have not noticed it before? The eyes, those eyes, hadn't been alive at all. They were lifeless glass, reflecting the dim lights above, casting an eerie gleam across the table. The mannequin was wearing a faded, worn-out trucker cap, its expression permanently frozen in terror. But it wasn't just the figure, it was the whole diner. Everything seemed off, too perfect, too staged. Charlie stood there for a long moment, his mind trying to connect the dots. Why the hell was there a mannequin in a booth? And why the hell was it staring at him? A sudden rush of unease spread through him like ice water in his veins. He turned, ready to leave, to find his rig and get the hell out of there. But as he glanced over his shoulder, he noticed that the other booths in the diner, once empty, now seemed full. The shadows of people sat there, hunched over their food, their faces hidden in the darkness. The tableware was old, crusted with remnants of food that hadn't been touched in what seemed like years. The air, thick with the smell of stale coffee and grease, made Charlie's stomach churn. One booth, the one closest to the window, had another figure, this one much darker. Its face was hidden in shadow, and Charlie could barely make out the shape of a wide-brimmed hat sitting on the figure's head. But there was something else. A faint, unnatural glow around the outline of the person. Charlie's breath caught. His fingers clenched into fists, the sense of dread growing, suffocating. The figure hadn't been there a moment ago. With his heart hammering, Charlie turned on his heel, instinctively heading for the door. But as he reached for the handle, a sudden clink broke the stillness, like glass shattering. He froze. A soft voice like a whisper curled into his ear from behind. "Leave now." Charlie spun around, his eyes wide in panic, but the diner was just as it had been before. Silent, still. The figure in the booth by the window was gone, replaced only by the mannequin, staring at him with those lifeless eyes. His mind was reeling. He hadn't imagined it, he had heard the voice. His pulse raced as his hand shot to the door handle. He pulled hard, but the door wouldn't budge. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, yanking harder. But no matter how much force he used, it stayed locked. He tried again, this time desperately slamming his shoulder against it. Nothing. The whisper came again, softer this time, but somehow more insistent. "They're coming for you." Charlie felt his stomach flip. The mannequins, the figures in the booths, they weren't just decorations. They were something else, something dark. And they weren't just watching him, they were waiting. As he spun to face the rest of the diner, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The once empty booth by the door now had a new figure. The person, or what looked like a person, was draped in a long, tattered coat. Their face was completely obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, their eyes hidden in darkness. The only thing visible was the faint, glowing outline of their form. Charlie couldn't help it. His hand shot out toward the door again, and this time, with a force he didn't think he had left in him, he yanked it open. The cold night air hit him like a slap to the face, but he didn't stop. He bolted for his rig. But as his boots hit the gravel, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was right behind him, that whatever had been waiting inside the diner was now following him out. He reached his truck, heart pounding in his chest. He didn't even bother to look back as he scrambled into the driver's seat. His hands were shaking as he gripped the steering wheel, and for a moment all he could do was stare at the dim headlights of his rig, still illuminating the diner in the rearview mirror. Then the air grew still again. Charlie's breath quickened as the headlights flickered and died. In the quiet, he swore he heard something faint and distant whispering his name. Charlie's foot slammed down on the accelerator, his truck jerking forward with a violent surge of power. The tires screeched against the gravel, kicking up a cloud of dust as he sped away from the diner. But as the road stretched out ahead of him, an unsettling feeling settled over him, like the air itself was pressing in heavy and thick. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. No, everything was wrong. As he sped down the highway, his hands gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white with tension. His eyes flicked nervously to the rearview mirror, expecting to see the dim lights of the diner's neon sign fading into the distance. But when he looked, the only thing that stared back at him was darkness. Not the darkness of the empty road ahead, but something more suffocating. Something that felt like it was creeping up behind him. Something that wanted to pull him into. And Charlie shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his mind. It wasn't the first time he had felt uneasy on the road, but tonight was different. The diner, the mannequins, the voices, the ghostly figure by the window. It wasn't just his imagination. Something had happened there. Something he couldn't explain. As the truck rumbled down the long stretch of road, the headlights cutting through, the night. Charlie's mind raced. He tried to focus on the steady hum of the engine, the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt, but the sound of whispering was still in his ears. He had heard it clearly. They were calling him. "Get a grip, Charlie," he muttered to himself, his voice tight. "It's just a rest stop. Nothing more, just a weird place. Nothing more." But the whispers only grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just the wind now carrying faint voices from somewhere far away. It was something closer, something in the air, circling him. It felt like they were still there, watching him, following him. The headlights of his truck flickered again, but this time, they didn't just fade. They went completely out. Charlie cursed, slamming his fist against the dashboard. "Come on," he growled, struggling to keep the truck steady as the darkness swallowed him whole. Without the headlights, he was driving blind, just trusting the faint outline of the road to guide him. But then something caught his eye. A dim, unnatural glow flickered in the distance, far ahead. Too far to be any kind of normal light. It was too steady, too bright to be a natural light. Charlie's heart raced, his fingers tightening around the wheel. He leaned forward, squinting into the darkness, trying to make out what it was. Slowly, the glow started to take shape. A figure standing alone on the side of the road. A shadowy figure in the distance, moving slowly, steadily, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. A cold shiver ran down Charlie's spine. He wanted to look away, to ignore it, to keep driving, but the figure, it wasn't moving like a person. Its body seemed to shift and melt in the low light, the edges of its form distorting as if it were not entirely solid. It was more like a silhouette, a shadow too dark to be fully real. And it was walking toward him. Charlie's foot eased off the gas, his truck slowing on its own accord. He tried to turn his eyes away, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't take his gaze off the figure. It was like it was pulling him in, like it wanted him to stop, to pull over, to get out. But he couldn't do that. Not now. Not with everything that had already happened tonight. His truck jerked to a halt, tires grinding to a stop on the lonely stretch of road. The air around him seemed to freeze, the sound of his engine cutting off like the world had been muted. A voice echoed. In the dead silence, it wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, a whisper calling his name. Charlie. His heart raced. He turned his head slowly, eyes darting around the cab of the truck. But he was alone. There was no one there. No one in the shadows. No one in the dark. Charlie. The whisper came again, clear as day, almost as if it were right next to him. His skin crawled, his mind screamed at him to drive, to leave, but his body was frozen. "Charlie, you can't leave, not now." The voice sounded like it was everywhere, coming, from every direction, like the wind itself had taken on a voice of its own. Charlie opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His throat was dry, his breath shallow. Sweat slicked his palms as he gripped the wheel tighter. He glanced in the rearview mirror once more. The figure had vanished, but the glow remained. flickering like an eerie beacon in the distance. He wasn't alone on this road. He never had been. The figure reappeared in his peripheral vision, but this time, it was closer. Too close. It was standing right at the edge of his truck, its dark, shrouded face inches from the glass of the driver's side. Charlie froze, his eyes wide in terror. The figure's features were impossible to make out, but there was no mistaking the presence, the unmistakable feeling that it was not human. Its head tilted, and Charlie could swear it was staring into him, into his very soul. Without thinking, Charlie slammed his foot down on the accelerator. The truck shot forward with a roar, tearing down the road, the engine's power surging beneath him. But as the truck sped away, the figure didn't vanish. It remained at the edge of the road, watching him, its presence like a heavy weight pressing against his chest. Charlie's breath came in sharp gasps as he looked around, desperate for a sign that he was getting away, that the figure wouldn't follow. But the road stretched endlessly before him. No turns, no exits, nothing. The whispers started again, softer now, but unmistakable. "Turn around, Charlie." But he didn't listen. He couldn't. If he stopped again, if he turned back, there was no telling what might happen. His mind raced, trying to find some explanation for the things he'd seen, the glowing figure, the voice calling his name. But the harder he tried to make sense of it, the less it all added up. This wasn't just a creepy rest stop. This wasn't just a bad night on the road. This was something else, something darker, something that wasn't going to let him leave. The road stretched on like a dark, never-ending ribbon, winding and twisting in ways that didn't feel natural. Charlie's truck roared down the asphalt, its headlights cutting through the black night. But every time he glanced into the rear-view mirror, the road behind him seemed to disappear into shadow. It was as though the road didn't want him to know where it had come from or where it was going. He glanced over at the GPS mounted on the dashboard. It blinked back at him, its usual route no longer visible. Instead, it was just a map of dark roads and strange, twisting paths that didn't exist on any map he had ever seen. His heart skipped a beat. What the hell is happening? The figure had vanished, but its presence still lingered in his mind. And those whispers. The whispers had not stopped. They were a constant undercurrent, rising and falling with the wind, sometimes faint, sometimes louder, but always there, clawing at his thoughts. "Turn around, Charlie." The voice sounded again, just as it had before, soft but undeniably real, seeping into his ears, rattling his mind. Charlie slammed his hands on the wheel, trying to shake it off. "Shut up," he muttered under his breath. But it didn't help. The whispers only grew louder, more insistent. They felt like they were in the very air around him, surrounding him, almost as if the highway itself was speaking. "You can't run, Charlie. It's already too late." He clenched his jaw, trying to focus on the road ahead. He needed to keep moving. He needed to get away from whatever was happening on this road. But no matter how fast he drove, no matter how far he went, it felt like the road was pulling him back, like there was no escape. Suddenly, the truck shuddered. The lights flickered again, but this time it wasn't just the headlights, it was the whole truck, the engine, everything, all of it. For a second, the world outside the truck went black, and then a sound. A low, guttural growl. Charlie's heart pounded in his chest as he hit the brakes. The truck lurched, tires screeching as it slowed to a stop. His breath caught in his throat as the sound of something moving, something huge, scraped across the road just beyond the reach of his headlights. His mind screamed for him to drive, to get the hell out of there, but his body wouldn't move. He was frozen in place, staring into the dark, wondering what the hell was out there. The sound stopped, and then through the windshield he saw it. A figure, but not like the ones before. This one was different. It was huge, taller than any human, its shape hulking and unnatural. A shadow, more shadow than flesh. Its limbs twisted and bent in ways that were physically impossible. It was as though it wasn't entirely real, like it was slipping in and out of existence. For a second, Charlie couldn't breathe. His mind raced with a dozen different thoughts, all of them screaming the same thing. It's not real. It can't be real. But his instincts were telling him something else. He could feel its presence pressing against him, could almost hear it breathing, even though it wasn't making a sound. The air around him grew cold, icy cold, like winter had settled inside the cab. The trucker's eyes locked onto the figure's dark form, trying to make sense of it. He felt his hands tremble on the steering wheel. He didn't know what he was seeing, but everything inside him screamed at him to drive, to leave. But when he stepped on the gas, nothing happened. The engine didn't roar to life. It didn't even sputter. It was as if the truck had become part of the highway itself, as if it had stopped obeying his commands, stopped following his will. Then the figure moved. It lurched forward, slow, deliberate steps. The ground beneath, it cracking as it moved, closer, closer. Charlie's pulse quickened. His foot slammed on the gas, but still the truck didn't move. The figure was drawing near now, its glowing, pale eyes staring directly at him. And just before it reached the truck, just as its grotesque hand extended toward him, Charlie heard something he had not expected. A voice. "It's the road, Charlie," it whispered, its tone deep and resonating. "The highway knows your name. It knows what you've done. You'll never leave." Charlie's breath hitched. His mind reeled with 1,000 thoughts, trying to piece together what was happening. He couldn't make sense of it. How could he? Suddenly, his foot jerked off. The brake. The truck surged forward, moving like it was being pulled by some unseen force. The engine roared to life again, but this time it wasn't the comforting sound of the truck he knew. It was wrong. Twisted. A deep, rumbling growl that vibrated through the cab. The figure seemed to vanish as he sped down the road, the headlights, illuminating a wall of shadows that seemed to stretch forever. He didn't know how long he had been driving, but the landscape outside his window was changing. It was getting darker. The road felt endless. His mind snapped back to the whispers. They were louder now, almost deafening. His eyes flicked from the road ahead to the GPS, but it was gone, completely blank. The map had faded into static, and now all he could see was an endless stretch of black. The road was alive. It wasn't just the figure. It wasn't just the truck. The whole damn highway was watching him. As he drove, it became clear that no matter how far he went, the road wouldn't let him leave. The next town, the next rest stop, the next turn, everything was disappearing. Every exit, every sign, every signpost was gone. The road had become a trap. And as Charlie glanced into the rearview mirror again, he could see it. The figures. They were there again, standing in the shadows, pale and ghostly, watching. Always watching. They had been there since the moment he took the shortcut, and now, they weren't leaving. Not until he joined them. He had entered their world. The highway wasn't a road. It was a place that didn't exist on any map. A place between life and death, where lost souls wandered, where the road itself took on a mind of its own. And Charlie? He had driven straight into the heart of it, and the road wasn't going to let him go. Not now, not ever, because on the highway of lost souls, there is no escape. Charlie's grip tightened on the wheel as his truck hurtled down the endless stretch of highway, the dim light from his headlights slicing through the thick, oppressive darkness. His breath came fast and shallow, every nerve in his body screaming at him to stop, to pull over, to somehow make sense of what was happening. But deep down he knew there was no stopping. There was no safety. There was no place to go. The road had swallowed him whole, and now it was chasing him. He glanced at the rearview mirror again, his pulse quickening when he saw the figures, the walkers, in the distance. They were moving in a steady, unnerving procession along the side of the highway, their pale, translucent forms barely visible in the gloom. But this time something was different. They weren't just standing still like they had been before. Now they were moving faster, and with every mile he drove, they seemed to be gaining on him. Charlie slammed his foot down on the gas pedal, pushing the truck harder, faster, desperate to put distance between himself and those shadows. But no matter how fast he drove, the figures in the mirror kept appearing closer, their pale faces twisted in strange, haunting expressions, their limbs moving at unnatural angles as they stalked him like predators in the dark. No, 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 this can't be happening. The road ahead of him stretched out like a black snake, its curves twisting in impossible angles, its surfaces smooth and unyielding as glass. There was no sign of an end, no way out. The highway had become a living thing, its hunger insatiable, and Charlie was its prey. Suddenly the engine sputtered. Again, the truck bucked beneath him, the once reliable hum of the engine faltering. He swerved, cursing under his breath, struggling to keep control as the truck threatened to stall. His fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Come on, come on. He slammed his foot harder against the pedal, but the truck's power faded. The engine whined, struggling to keep going, then nothing. It was like the road was draining the life out of the truck, sapping it of all energy, forcing it to slow. And then, from the corner of his eye, Charlie saw it. A shadow. Not the walkers this time, but something darker, larger. A figure standing in the middle of the road, blocking his path. His breath caught in his throat as the figure seemed to materialize from the very air itself. It was massive, towering over the truck, and its features were wrong. There was something inhuman about it, a shape that seemed to shift and twist in ways that defied physics, an overwhelming darkness that made the very light of the headlights flicker and stutter. No, 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 no. Charlie jerked the wheel to the side, the truck veering wildly to the shoulder of the road. The tires screeched in protest as he fought to keep the rig under control. His hands were slick with sweat, his pulse thundering in his ears. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. It was just there, watching, waiting. And the closer he got to it, the harder it became to breathe. The air felt thicker, suffocating, like the truck was moving through a fog of sheer dread. The engine sputtered again, the noise of the truck's tires against the road suddenly sounding distant, like he was driving through a void. And then, just as Charlie thought he might lose control entirely, the figure stepped aside, vanishing back into the dark. Charlie didn't waste any time. His foot slammed on the gas again, the truck surging forward, his heart racing. But the horror wasn't over. He could feel the road beneath him, feel the change in its rhythm, as if the ground itself was shifting. The figures were moving closer. They were no longer just distant shapes in his rear view. Now they were right there, walking on the road alongside him, keeping pace with the truck, their faces twisted in agony, their eyes hollow and vacant, yet somehow intent, like they were waiting for something, for him. His head snapped around, to the side. He could see them now, standing just beyond the truck's headlights, their faces frozen in time, their mouths open as if trying to scream. And then, he heard it, a voice. It was a whisper at first, barely audible above the hum of the engine. Charlie. It was his name, spoken with such chilling familiarity that it made his blood run cold. He looked in the mirror again. One of the figures was directly behind, him walking slowly, its head tilted in a way that was wrong, impossibly twisted. It was watching him, studying him with an unsettling intensity, its lips curling into a grotesque grin. Charlie, we're waiting. His heart pounded, his breathing ragged, as his eyes darted between the road and the figures that were creeping ever closer. Every time he looked away from the road, the truck seemed to lose speed, to slow down as if it was giving up. The world outside the window was distorted now, everything spinning and warping, the moonlight flickering like a dying light bulb. Then, the whispers grew louder. Charlie, you're one of us now. You can't run from us. The air turned colder. His hands were shaking on the wheel. The whispers were getting louder. But now they weren't just in the air. They were in his head. Come and join us, Charlie. Join us on the road. He couldn't take it anymore. Charlie's foot slammed on the gas pedal again, the truck roaring to life as he pushed it as fast as it could go. But the figures didn't let up. No matter how fast he drove, no matter how hard he tried to escape, they were always there. He could hear their footsteps now, right behind him, the rhythm matching his own. He slammed his eyes shut, fighting the panic that threatened to take over, trying to push past the feeling that the road was closing in on him, that it was alive and pulling him in. But it wasn't just the figures anymore. It was something else, something darker. He could feel their presence creeping around him, like a cloud of doom settling over the truck. He wasn't just being chased anymore. He was being drawn in, pulled by an invisible force toward the same fate as those who had come before him. Charlie's heart pounded. His hands were slick with sweat as he gripped the wheel tighter. "There's no escape, Charlie." And with that thought, the truck's headlights flickered once more, and for just a brief, horrifying moment, he saw the highway stretch on forever, an endless loop that led to nowhere. The road was alive, and it was going to take him, just like it had taken all the others. But no matter how hard he tried to push, the road kept pulling him back, deeper, further, closer to the darkness. And somewhere out there in the night, the figures continued to walk, and they were still calling his name. Charlie's mind was a haze of panic and confusion, the road stretching before him seemingly endless, a black abyss that refused to let him go. The truck rattled beneath him, its engine roaring like an animal trapped in a cage. But no matter how fast he drove, no matter how many times he slammed on the gas pedal, the figures behind him never slowed down. Their pale faces, their hollow eyes were a constant presence, following him like shadows born from the very darkness that clung to the highway. "I have to get away. I have to." He didn't even know what he was running from anymore. Was it the road? The figures? Or was it the feeling that there was something else, something far darker lurking just beyond his line of sight? A sudden sharp turn jolted the truck as it swerved violently to the right, throwing Charlie against the door. The tires screeched, the truck fighting against the force of the curve. He fought to keep the rig under control, but it felt as if the road itself was twisting and pulling him in, refusing to let him escape. In the rearview mirror, the figures were now in a tight, unbroken line, walking in perfect synchrony. They were getting closer, their feet moving with purpose, as though the distance between them and the truck was inconsequential. But it wasn't just their proximity that terrified Charlie. It was the way they were changing. They weren't just shadowy figures anymore. The faint, ghostly outlines of their bodies were becoming clearer, more solid, more human. And those faces, the faces that were once lost in shadow, blurred with time, were now sharp and unmistakable. They looked like people, real people, people who had walked these roads and disappeared, their fates sealed in the very tarmac beneath Charlie's tires. He turned his head quickly, his pulse spiking, as the whispering grew louder. It was no longer just a faint sound carried on the wind. It was in his ears, thick and suffocating, like an invisible presence pressing in on him from all sides. Charlie, his heart skipped a beat, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror again, and this time, one of the figures was right behind him, so close that he could almost feel the cold that emanated from. A pair of pale, glassy eyes stared back at him from the darkness, unblinking, frozen in that vacant stare. But it wasn't just looking at him, it was looking into him like it was reading his very soul. "Charlie, you can't run from us." His grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles white with the force. The truck lurched again, its engine sputtering as if it too was losing the will to move forward. Every mile that passed felt like an eternity, the road stretching on, refusing to give him an end. Suddenly, the truck began to slow down on its own, as if the road beneath him was exerting its own pressure, forcing him to stop. The engine whined in protest, the once powerful rumble now a faint whimper struggling to keep going. Panic shot through Charlie's veins. The figures were closing in. The whispers were becoming clearer, more insistent. "Stop, Charlie. Stop and join us." He could feel the weight of their presence, their coldness pressing down on him. They were inside the truck now, invading his space, filling the air with their oppressive energy. The temperature inside the cab dropped, and his breath began to form visible clouds in the air. The road seemed to pulse, the headlights flickering erratically, casting strange, jerky shadows against the windshield. Charlie slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The truck roared back to life, but the figures didn't disappear. No matter how fast he drove, they kept pace. The headlights cast eerie beams across the highway, illuminating the twisted, contorted forms of the walkers who followed him. And then, just as quickly as it started, the truck lurched to a sudden stop. The engine died. Charlie's heart skipped a beat. The hum of the truck's engine was gone. The eerie stillness that followed felt like an eternity. He gripped the steering wheel with shaking hands, his mind racing. No, no, no. His hands fumbled with the gear shift, trying to get the truck moving. Again. Nothing. The truck was completely immobilized. His eyes darted to the side, and for the first time, he realized that the road had changed. The familiar stretch of asphalt had been replaced with something darker, something more foreboding. The figures were surrounding him now, no longer in the distance, but right up against the truck, standing in the glow of the headlights. Their pale faces were locked in eerie expressions, some of them smiling, others with mouths gaping open in silent screams. They were waiting, watching. Charlie's breath hitched in his throat, and then from somewhere deep within the dark, a voice spoke. "It's too late, Charlie. You're already one of us." He froze. The voice wasn't from outside the truck. It wasn't from the figures. It came from within the cab, from the passenger seat. His heart slammed in his chest, his blood running cold as he slowly turned his head. The seat next to him, the one that had been empty moments ago, was now filled. A figure sat there, dark and shrouded, its features barely visible but somehow familiar. The air grew thick, suffocating, as the figure's head tilted toward him, its mouth stretching into an unholy grin. "You've been chosen, Charlie. The road never lets go." He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The figure reached out, its fingers long and skeletal, brushing his arm with an icy touch, and then everything went dark. No escape, no way out. The road had claimed him, and Charlie would never be seen again. The highway stretched on, as endless and unforgiving as it had been before. The truck, empty, abandoned, sat still on the side of the road, its headlights dimming into nothingness. And in the distance a figure walked along the edge of the highway, its pale face twisted into a hollow grin. Another lost soul, another traveler who would never make it out. The road had claimed them all,